Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexanderson, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. What does it mean for a place to be truly quiet? It's a question I've been pondering over the last several months following a webinar from the Keystone Trails Association and the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. They had a discussion with Quiet Parks International, a nonprofit committed to saving quiet for the benefit of all life. Saving the quiet. What does that mean? Quiet's not something I've ever thought much about. Growing up with my loud family, noisy traffic, ringing cell phones, and roaring air conditioning, quiet was never an option. But I've certainly experienced quiet on hiking trails, right? Wrong. There's always some sort of noise. If it's not the airplanes above or the nearby cars and trucks, it's a speaker from a selfish hiker or the hum of a factory or data center. Man, I don't think I've ever experienced real quiet. But what does that mean? How bad can a little noise be? Actually, it can be really bad. It can lead to hearing loss, stress, anxiety, sleep disturbance, cardiovascular damage, and more. But not only does noise affect us, it can affect the wildlife around us. Noise can disrupt wildlife behavior, migration patterns, and communication. So what can we do and where can we go to experience quiet? Is it even possible? That's what this episode's guest is trying to find out. I'm excited to welcome Matthew Mickelson to the podcast. Matt is an award-winning sound designer, field recordist, filmmaker, conservationist, and chairperson for the Quiet Parks International's board of directors. Matt, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
What is Quiet Parks International, and how did the Quiet Parks movement to preserve natural soundscapes begin?
Quiet Parks International is kind of the result of decades of work that's been happening by a lot of people in kind of the acoustic ecology and mindfulness world. A lot of people in our organization will say it kind of stemmed from a lot of the work Gordon Hempton was doing to protect 1 square inch of silence in Olympic National Park. But basically, we're an organization dedicated to preserving quiet. Quiet means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts, and we believe we should have access to all of them. We've been officially an organization since 2019. We've been working to protect quiet around the world since then. We believe that when we save quiet, we can save everything else. So we're working hard.
Why is protecting natural quiet such an important part of conservation?
When people talk about natural quiet, like early on, I like to try and distinguish that when we talk about natural sound or natural quiet, we're not talking about an absence of sound. If natural sound is the sound of birds and water rippling on a stream and things like that, that's all natural sound. Noise is anything that disrupts a natural environment. So airplanes, invasive species, things like resource extraction. So when I talk about natural quiet or natural sound, I always like to make that distinction that it's not, the Amazon jungle is quiet naturally, but it isn't a quiet place like a recording studio.
Yeah.
Natural sound is really important in a lot of different aspects. I can talk ecologically a bit about why soundscapes are an important resource for ecosystems. Nature is busy communicating the same way that we are as humans. When noise enters an ecosystem, it degrades nature's ability to carry out that communication, to do things like find mates and find food and avoid predators, things like that. So ecologically, sound is a really important resource for lots of different animals and birds and insects, reptiles, things like that. From a more human perspective, quiet's really important for us as humans because that's what we evolved in. It was only in the past few hundred years that we've been subjected to the levels of noise that we have been. And noise is bad for our health. Like high levels of noise is very clearly proven to be bad for our health. When we're in quiet places, it helps us be quiet, both mentally and physically. It lowers our stress hormones. It allows us to think more clearly. Quiet's good for us. Noise is bad for us. So it's only recently that we've really started to realize how important it is to protect and preserve quiet, the few quiet places we have left, so we have access to them before we kind of lose the possibility of being in quiet at all.
What are some of the criteria you use to identify and designate a quiet park?
So Quiet Parks International has a few different program areas, we call them. One is the Wilderness Quiet Parks program, which I'm the director of. We have an urban quiet parks program. We have a quiet conservation areas program. We have a quiet trails program. We have quiet stays and residences and communities. We have all these different kind of categories of quiet. And for each of those categories, we have a certain set of criteria that we've developed in order to measure and sort of award those places as quiet park status. For a wilderness quiet park, for instance, we measure the space in between noise pollution events. So we go deploy high sensitivity microphones in an area and sound pressure level meters, and we're measuring the noise free interval essentially. And that's one measurement that we'll use for wilderness quiet parks. In places like urban quiet parks, some places are never noise free, but we use different criteria like decibel level, measuring sound pressure level, that is. And there's a lot of subjective measurements and kind of qualitative measurements that happen as well. Like, can you hear your footsteps? Can you have a whispered conversation with someone next to you without having to raise your voice? What's the maximum SPL level of a noise pollution event that happens in an urban quiet park? So there's all this different criteria that's posted on our website so people can dive in if they're interested about what kind of qualifies in our mind as quiet. And quiet exists in a lot of different forms, and it's worth kind of acknowledging all of them.
Do you think people's definition of quiet is different from other people's? Like, do you think if you grew up a certain way, this sort of quiet is? I almost think about those people that can't go to sleep unless they hear like the buzz of a city, like they hear the honking and the noise like that. Like, what kind of difficulty is it to explain what quiet means to people who live in a very noisy world?
That's such a good question, and it's one that I think about a lot. The definition of quiet is totally intertwined with culture and the way you were raised and where you live. Here in the United States, we have huge, urban areas, but we also have some huge wilderness. And it's interesting as a country that we get to experience both of those things. It's very unique. Like, a lot of people who live in the US and haven't traveled a lot don't realize how lucky we are to not only have great cities like, New York and Philadelphia and Boston and San Francisco, but we also have places like Yosemite National Park or the Wind River Range in Wyoming. Like, the fact that that's all in one place is amazing. And our definitions of quiet are so related to where we grew up and how we grew up. Kind of an extreme example is I've worked with a native population in Ecuador called the Kofan population, who were awarded the first wilderness quiet park. And they live and have lived for thousands of years in the Amazon River Basin, along the Zabalo River, and others. They are such born listeners because they had to be. So, I visited them with a group of like expert listeners, so to speak. And we were hearing like barely 10% of what they were, because they're just so
Oh,
keyed into
wow.
their environment. They just know everything that's happening and they're observing so much because they grew up in quiet and they've used that quiet in order to find food and to have shelter and protect themselves from predators. Whereas if you grew up in New York City and I took you to a wilderness quiet park, you're most likely going to be pretty uncomfortable because it's not something that people experience all the time. And very often in doing this work for more than a decade now, I've had people reach out who say, I know a quiet place. And I'll take you there, or here are the coordinates or something. And I go, and I understand why they think it's quiet, but actually when you are measuring it with scientific measurement equipment, noise pollution exists everywhere. And it's amazing the way that sound travels through an environment. Sound can travel just like tens of miles, originating from a point. So you imagine like the nearest road to any place. Like we do have a lot of vast landscapes here in the States, and elsewhere. However, noise is just so prevalent everywhere we go. So it's a long answer to your question about the kind of cultural significance of quiet. But we use quiet in many cultures as a way to kind of explain things that words can't. Like, I remember moments of silence that we held for different events in this country's history, like in 9/11. Like, I remember we held moments of silence as a nation. And the reason you hold a moment of silence is that words are not enough. And that idea of silence holding space for things that words can't exists in cultures all over the world. There's a lot of really interesting studies about it.
That's interesting too, because when you think of something where there's a moment where you can't say anything, you say I'm speechless, which is quiet. Which is a very interesting way to describe. Listen, I am born and raised in New Jersey. I talk all the time. It is hard for me to become speechless, but that's certainly a moment of where that quiet fills up a space that matters to the person who's hearing it and the person who's saying it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we as a culture, we're very good at talking and we're not so good at listening. Um, and that's not just American culture, that's lots of cultures around the world. But we feel like when you seek quiet places, you also seek to be a listener. And if we can all listen more, I think we can all be happier and understand each other more. And so not only do we feel like, as an organization, that quiet's important as a resource, but listening is something that we need to do more of. And quiet allows us to be better listeners. And one of our founders and really good friend of mine, Vikram, who works for Quiet Parks, he says that quiet is quieting. And so when you can experience quiet externally, you feel quiet internally. And that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I heard many years ago somebody kind of say, when somebody's talking to you, are you waiting to talk or are you actually listening? And I was like, I'm waiting to talk like everybody else. They're like, no, not everybody else thinks that way. And I was like, oh, that's important. You should probably listen more.
Yeah. And I mean, not only when you're in conversation with other people, but when was the last time that you like went out into the woods alone and just sat down and just did nothing, and just let yourself be there? And that's something that we really struggle with, I think. Lots of people struggle with for good reasons. It's difficult, but the more time you spend in quiet, I think the better listener you are to yourself too, which is one of the wonderful side effects, I think, of seeking out quiet places and quiet experiences.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like you said, many people think of quiet as simply like the absence of noise. What does true wilderness quiet sound like? Is it a personal thing? Is there something, like you said, that can be measured?
We believe quiet is measurable. Um, and at the same time, I think quiet can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and everyone's definition, I think, is valid. But I do have some scientific criteria that I do believe in, when I'm talking about a acoustically noise-free environment. Um, and that can sound like a lot of different things. I've experienced these noise-free environments, or these noise-free intervals that we'll call them, in places up in high alpine mountain zones where it just, you barely hear anything, or it's the sound of wind. Same thing in the desert. You can be in a desert that's void of sound, and all you're actually hearing is your heartbeat and a little bit of ringing in your ears. And every little movement you make with your clothes sounds incredibly loud. Quiet can also be A quiet place can be jarring, like in the Amazon jungle, where sleep, like you almost need earplugs to sleep in the Amazon sometimes, because the insect activity and the frogs and all the nocturnal activity happening is so loud and so jarring that you almost need to block out some of that sound. And that happens in northern Minnesota too, when we get spring peepers, which are the frogs that come out first, usually in the spring. I mean, it can be so loud that it's nearly deafening. So, like I was saying earlier, quiet and natural quiet are a little bit different. I have a recording studio. It's quiet. It has a low sound pressure level. The Amazon jungle can be quiet, but it certainly is not, acoustically quiet. It's loud and cacophonous, and there's a lot happening. But we're really focusing, at least in wilderness quiet parks and throughout the organization, on noise. And noise is anything that's not really natural to the environment. Gordon Hempton has this wonderful quote that I'll butcher, but about essentially how noise is distracting from the important information in a sound. Any sound is important information. Noise is anything that degrades that important information. And then you just have to decide, okay, as a person, what is noise? What is sound? And that's a question that you can keep asking yourself again and again in all sorts of different situations.
How can time spent in quiet nature impact our mental health, creativity, or sense of connection to a place?
Quiet is a great antidote, and accompaniment to all those things you just mentioned. So when you're in a naturally quiet place, your heart rate lowers, the levels of cortisol lower, so your stress hormones lower. There have been studies that have shown that being in quiet is good for your interpersonal communications. It's overall offers boosts of your mental health. And that is, I think, partly being in nature is good for you too. Like, I'm not saying just quiet is good for you, but being in a quiet, natural place, I think amplifies all the good parts of nature as well. And it does make you more creative. And all those things that you kind of want as a result of seeking time outside. And I think for a while we were not maybe speculating, but potentially hopeful that time in nature was good for us. We now have so much science that is saying nature's really good for us. Surprise, surprise. Quiet is really good for us too. And all of the afflictions that we feel due to noise, the higher stress hormones, the higher rates of cardiovascular implications, the decreased attention spans, all of that can be essentially reversed with being in quiet. When we are in quiet, we see all of those negative impacts start to reverse.
And I would think too, it's important to note that there are people, I'm thinking of, Pittsburgh or Philly, that may not have the opportunity to be able to travel into the Pennsylvania wilds and sit, in these beautiful spaces. There are still opportunities to experience quiet. While it might not be the quietest of quiets, there's still an opportunity to be able to feel that sense of quiet even near where they live.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most important programs that we have is the Urban Quiet Parks program, because we realize that like finding yourself in the middle of a wilderness area is difficult, and it's a privilege. It requires a lot of work and effort and money potentially to get out there. So the Urban Quiet Parks program essentially looks to identify quiet places that are within public transit distance of cities. Sometimes they can exist pretty close to city centers. Like in London, we have Hampstead Heath as an urban quiet park, and you can walk around Hampstead Heath and have a really quiet experience, even though you're in the middle of London, essentially. Central Park has some quiet places in it. They haven't quite met our standards yet, but you can go up north in Central Park and take a hike. And a lot of people don't even realize that. And so our goal is that, no matter where you live, you should be able to access quiet, because our worlds are too loud. And it really is, once I think I meet a lot of people who are like, why, quiet or noise, or like, who cares? And I think for the people who say that, I understand, because there's so many things happening to care about and issues to focus on and types of pollution. When you experience quiet, it really becomes self-evident why we need to continue to protect these quiet places. And it also becomes important for you as a human, once you experience quiet, to continue to find it. Like, I think the first time I actually was in a quiet place was because I took interest in this work. I had a mentor, Gordon, who took me into a quiet place. And I was 18 at the time, so really young. And I was like, oh man, I've spent a lot of time outside for someone who's my age. My parents would take me on the Delaware Water Gap. We were backpacking, we'd go whitewater rafting, we went out west, but I don't think I've ever been in natural quiet before. I've never spent more than a few minutes without noise pollution. And once I experienced it, it became something that I need for my well-being. And it's a place that I like. Seeking out quiet places has become a really core part of who I am. Separately from my work with quiet parks. If quiet parks went poof tomorrow, I'd still be who I am and need quiet in order to like live a happy and fulfilled life.
In your experience, what are the biggest sources of noise pollution affecting even remote natural areas?
The largest sources of noise generally have to do with transportation of humans or goods. Air traffic is a big one, both commercial and freight, and private too. But if you've never had the experience of like looking at one of those flight radars,
Oh yeah.
just go on to like flightradar24.com, or if you Google flight radar, you can find one, and just look at how many planes are in the sky at any given time. It is shocking how many planes, thousands, tens of thousands of planes are in the sky at any given time. And when you think about, if we've all had the experience of like watching a jet fly over us at 30,000, 35,000 feet and hearing the sound of it, imagine what that radius of that sound is in an environment. And when you have a jet flying over every 5 or 10 minutes, the amount of noise that airplane is casting throughout a landscape is really vast. So that's one, very obvious form of noise pollution. Transportation on roads is another one. Highways are really loud. Cars are really loud. And it's not so much engines. It's like the noise of tires on pavement is really loud. If you've ever spent time in like Europe or Asia, they have quieter tires there, and it's kind of noticeable.
Oh, wow.
And speed limits are lower, so highways aren't quite as loud. And then if you look at oceans, noise in oceans is like a really big problem for marine life. And that's certainly not, I'm much more of a terrestrial expert as opposed to a marine expert. However, noise is like severely degrading marine ecosystems at a really alarming rate because sound travels incredibly efficiently through water. And you can also look up a live map of all the boats that are currently in the water. And it's just as shocking as the amount of planes in the sky. I mean, it really is so amazing to see how many ships and airplanes are in the sky or in the sea in the sky at any given time. And the sound just travels so efficiently. I had an experience in Nevada where I was trying to find the quietest place in Nevada, which if you've ever been to Nevada, sure, there is Vegas and there is Reno and there are some cities, but Nevada's got some open space for sure. And I was up in the high desert, like kind of on top of a mountain range plateau. The nearest road was more than 20 miles away from me in any direction. And I was so certain that I was in a quiet place. The only thing I was hearing was when airplanes were passing over. And I went to analyze my data from those recordings. And I was getting this really low frequency sound. I was like, what is this? Is it an error on my microphone? Like, was the electronics messed up or something? And it turns out it was a freight train, but it was like 20 miles, 15 miles away from where I was, traveling up and over a mountain range to get to where I was. That was the only plausible sort of cause. 15 miles. So, and humans have less sensitive hearing than other things that are existing in those ecosystems. So, finding quiet's really hard, and it's becoming harder and harder because air traffic is increasing, marine traffic is increasing, the number of cars on the road is increasing. So yeah.
Does Quiet Parks International look at ways to prevent sound pollution, or is the organization mainly focused on identifying places that are currently left?
We have looked at sort of the more mitigation approach, where we are identifying places that could be quiet and identifying the sources of noise and then trying to get those noise sources to not exist anymore. Early on in kind of the previous organization, which was called One Square Inch of Silence, we were essentially trying to get the FAA to reroute aircraft around Olympic National Park, which we were really hopeful on because we did the math on it. It like wasn't a big deal. They just have to go like a little bit further north or a little further south. The FAA has two priorities. One is safety and the next is efficiency. So hearing from a bunch of people who care about the sounds of birds wasn't necessarily a priority for them. I get it. It's hard to legislate against noise. And therefore, we find like a better approach is to find these places that are quiet and have the potential to remain quiet and empower local communities to continue to protect them. What I've found time and time again in all these quiet places that we work in is that the communities that surround these quiet places know and love the quiet there. And they are the people best prepared to continue to protect the quiet. So as far as conservationists go, I really don't like this idea of like coming in as a conservationist and saying like, this place needs to be protected, but I live 4,000 miles this way and I don't speak the same language as you and I have no cultural similarities to you. So I really feel like protecting places in any form of conservation has to be coming from the local community. And that's where we've had success. So identifying quiet places, identifying local communities there who care about the quiet, and then giving them the resources to continue to protect that quiet and serving as kind of quote unquote, like expert witnesses to the quiet and being able to quantify that quiet and tell them about what the potential hazards are. Or if a new data center is proposed in the area,
yeah.
I can talk about what data centers sound like and the way that sound from data centers travels and how it can degrade an environment. Which is obviously only one of the problems with data centers, but this is not a data center podcast.
Not yet.
So yeah, not yet. Soon to be. What is it? Hellbenders and data centers.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have worked with and been lucky to work with national parks, both here and in Canada and abroad, different state park agencies, different federal agencies, both in the US and abroad. And really, we are trying to help land managers fill the gap because a lot of land management teams don't have like a soundscape ecologist on staff. But I happen to know a lot of soundscape ecologists. So if a resource manager in XYZ National Park in Colorado recognizes that quiet is important, but doesn't have the ability to kind of know where to start, hey, I'll help you and try and help kind of fill in those gaps and identify quiet places and quantify it and work with them to help preserve it.
It's funny because the first thing I thought about when I first heard of Quiet Parks International was we had an issue here in Pennsylvania where the Maryland Air National Guard wanted to start flying low altitude missions over the Pennsylvania wilds. And I was still this is, I think, like 2022. I was still very new to the outdoors. And I was like, how big of a difference could that make? Like, and then you start reading about, I mean, if you've ever had a jet pass over your house, it's loud. To then go over one of the areas that we cherish so much. It's the most clear time of where I've seen people come out and they were like, no, we do not want this. This is important to us. I think that's what kind of put it on my radar, no pun intended, was the idea of just like sound is a huge component, and it's more than just somebody playing a speaker when you're hiking and somebody's being obnoxious. It's the idea of like that matters as much as that beauty that you're about to see and the ground beneath your feet. It's something that's a little bit harder to explain to people, but when you experience it, I think it kind of clicks for a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah, there are similar issues happening all over the country where the military wants to train in places where there are low population densities. And that's understandable. I guess like having them train over New York City probably isn't a good idea. And they need to do their training, absolutely. But there's this kind of like weird relationship between our military and our wilderness areas and national parks and state parks, where those lands are not for military exercises. And it's been very clear since the beginning of the National Parks Charter, from the creation of state parks, that those places are meant for us to enjoy and to conserve those lands. National forests are a little bit different. They have to do with some resources, things like that. They're under the USDA, so there is room for it all to happen. But good thing the military owns so much land in this country. They don't need to fly over the Pennsylvania wilds, and that's not to say that they shouldn't be training. They need to train. It's important that they train. It's important that they train in places where they're not degrading people's quality of life and not endangering the last kind of ecosystems that we have intact. And this is exactly what happened in Olympic National Park as well. We had F-35 jets flying over Olympic National Park and the military doing like electromagnetic warfare training over the park. And the people said no, and that's important, is that like we need to also hold our government accountable for providing us with environmental impact statements that are accurately done and different sort of alternatives and things like that. We have a voice here in this country, which is so awesome. So yeah, there's certainly more to it too than just fighter jets. But I think one thing that people don't often think about is, I meet people who are like, oh, who cares about noise? If you like hunting, if you like fishing, if you like hiking, if you have kids who spend time outside, like having fighter jets fly over your kids is really bad for you. It's like really bad for your health. It's bad for fish. It's bad for mammals. And that's not just like, some crazy sound guy telling you this. It's just, we don't even have technology to measure some of the sound waves that come off of these fighter jets. So yeah, there's a time and a place. I feel like over our neighborhoods and our national parks, it's just, personally, I just feel like not the place.
And now let's hear from our sponsors. Join the Keystone Trails Association for the Appalachian Trail History Hike Series. Hikes take place on June 6th and 27th in collaboration with America 250 PA, Cumberland County. Learn more at kta-hike.org. It's better outside, especially with a Purple Lizard map in your pack. Their award-winning cartography helps you see the big picture and explore some of the best outdoor destinations in Pennsylvania. Each map reveals trails, forests, and small towns waiting to be discovered, helping you plan, wander, and reconnect with the world around you. Discover the Pennsylvania Outdoor Recreation Map and the full collection at purplelizard.com, where outstanding maps lead to outstanding adventures. Hey fellow explorers, this is a message from the Pennsylvania Parks and Forests Foundation. You know those incredible state parks and forests Christian talks about in every episode? We're the ones helping make sure they stay incredible. From maintaining the trails you hike, to engaging volunteer groups who make your experience better, to supporting conservation projects that protect Pennsylvania's natural treasures while keeping these places accessible. We're behind the scenes making it happen. Whether you're planning your next waterfall hike or just dreaming about your favorite overlook, know that PPFF is working to preserve these special places for future generations of explorers. Learn more at paparksandforests.org. Looking to add some Pennsylvania charm to your space? Sister Sunflowers has you covered. Their unique stickers highlight the small local spots that make your community shine, from quirky caves to hidden gems. Perfect for your laptop, water bottle, or anywhere that needs a little hometown love. They got stickers, magnets, prints, and even a hand-drawn poster to keep track of all the Pennsylvania state parks and forests you've explored. Use code HELLBENDER15 for 15% off your first order. Support local, inspire adventure, and decorate with meaning, only at Sister Sunflowers. Looking for a spring getaway that's both peaceful and pulse-pounding? Discover Clarion County in western Pennsylvania. This May 8th and 9th, catch the roar of the Appalachian Mountain Stoll competition as pilots from across the nation tackle gravity-defying takeoffs and landings. Once the excitement winds down, find ear quiet in the Forest Cathedral of Cook Forest State Park. Wander through ancient pines, paddle the winding Clarion River, or lose yourself on miles of scenic trails. From high-end Airbnbs and cabins to cozy family campgrounds, your perfect stay is closer than you think. Plan your spring escape at discoverclarioncounty.com. Clarion County, your trailhead to happiness. Feeling stuck under winter layers and winter deadlines? Trade stale meetings for open air. Step out of the office and into the Laurel Highlands for a spring hiking weekend hosted by the Keystone Trails Association from May 1st to 3rd. Plan for 3 exhilarating days filled with more than 40 activities. Enjoy guided hikes and learn about birding, Frank Lloyd Wright's falling water, first aid, fly casting, and more. There's even a discounted room rate at the historic Summit Inn. Register today at kta-hike.org. All right, back to the show. Matt, it's funny. I'm thinking about the people that are let's just say that you're up against. You mentioned the military, transportation, aviation. Those are some big people to kind of have to go against to be like, hey, sound is important, quiet is important. How is that even possible to be able to get anything done with industries that are that huge?
It's a good question. I ask myself it often. I think an important distinction that I try and make is that I'm definitely not anti-military. I'm not anti-transportation or anti-aviation. I'm actually a huge plane nerd. I love watching aircraft and flying aircraft. It's a huge nerd hobby of mine. I own a motorcycle, I have an ATV. So I just think it's important that we have places for each of those things. And I respect that people want to drive their side by sides in really beautiful places and cool trails. We want to have places like that. And we're lucky enough where we can. There should also be places where you can't do that and where no one is allowed, or just foot travel is allowed. There should be places where you can train your F-35 fighter jets and do important and good training. So that way we can have, good military and a trained military. There needs to be, I think, some lines drawn of where that's acceptable and where it's not. So I try and I've I've talked with military commanders at Navy bases and stuff like that. And I think they get it, it's not this isn't super foreign to them. And there's a little bit of a not in my backyard syndrome that happens all over the place when it comes to environmental issues like this. It's we all want to be able to use AI for all sorts of stuff, but no data center in my town, which again, I totally understand. But instead of trying to kind of say I'm against these industries, it's okay, how can I bring them in and kind of be realistic? At some point I realized the FAA is not going to be able to work with us on this. That's okay. What can we do instead? So I think it's important that we kind of look holistically the big picture here. Would I love it if we could ban all flights over national parks? Yeah, I would personally. It's not realistic, so that's not my goal.
What are some of your most memorable or maybe profound quiet moments you've experienced in the field?
Wow, that's a really good question. I have a lot. I've spent like the better part of my life now, and my career, like finding and spending time in quiet places. And I didn't mention this at the top, but Quiet Parks International is an all volunteer organization. So I'm a volunteer. All of my colleagues are volunteers. I'm a sound recordist and like a sound designer by trade. That's how I put food on my table. So when I'm out looking for quiet places, I record sounds and use them in projects and things like this. So I've spent many months of my life kind of out in a tent or under the stars or sleeping in the back of my car trying to find quiet and record it. Um, and every time is special, even revisiting places that I've been to a lot. I think once you feel quiet, um, it's really like, yeah, it's a very nostalgic kind of experience that you have. One of the things that one of the stories I tell and that I'm like kind of becoming known for is I have a sound recording of myself getting nearly struck by lightning while I was chasing thunderstorms out in Colorado. So quiet isn't always calm. This life has like led me on a lot of crazy adventures as well, which I do love talking about. But the Danish have a word called hygge, which if you've never heard about that word, it's spelled Hygge. And hygge is like, doesn't have a direct translation to English. It can mean a lot of different things depending on the kind of circumstance. And I think quiet's the same way, or having a quiet experience, is that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you can have a quiet experience out in the middle of the desert, completely alone by yourself, and you're hearing nothing. You can also have a quiet experience, like sitting and having a meaningful conversation with a friend or something. And that feeling of quiet and quieting is, to me, just as important as like the decibel level and the sound pressure level and the noise-free interval. That's all important, but we can hold both things at the same time.
Pennsylvania has vast state forests, remote trails, and dark sky parks. Are there any places here that could qualify as potential quiet parks?
Short answer is yes. I think Pennsylvania will have places that will qualify for Quiet Parks Awards in its different categories. In 2026, we are beginning some preliminary work to do some surveys around Pennsylvania, partnering with the DCNR, to identify and kind of collect data on places that may or may not be quiet and qualify as a wilderness quiet park or as a quiet conservation area, something like that. And yeah, so we've identified 5 or 10 different areas around Pennsylvania that we think could be relatively noise-free, or at least I shouldn't say noise-free. I should say have a longer noise-free interval. The main not problem with Pennsylvania, but where Pennsylvania sits on the flight map,
Yeah.
makes it problematic for finding quiet, because you have all these huge airports along the eastern seaboard. So like any flight that is going east from, any of the 3 New York airports or Philadelphia or Boston or name your airport, like a lot of them are flying over Pennsylvania, or transcontinental flights that are coming further south from like Europe and Africa. Like you're getting a lot of air traffic in Pennsylvania. So it'll be really interesting to see what our kind of preliminary data ends up telling us. We are looking at the northern part of the state more seriously, places like Hammersley Wild area, and sort of that neck of the woods, so to speak, is I think where we might start. But if anyone has tips on quiet places in Pennsylvania, my email is matt@quietparks.org.
Yeah, it's funny. What I think is quiet, like, we kind of said it a little bit before we started recording, was there's a chance I may have never experienced true wilderness quiet. I don't even think that's like a guess anymore. I think that's probably true. Like, of all the places I've gone, you go, oh yeah, well, you've been to the Adirondacks. It's like, you see how many roads there are in the Adirondacks? It's like, oh, I've been to the PA Wilds. It's just like, hear how many planes are going over the PA Wilds. It's interesting to even think. Like, thank God you don't do a rating system where like some place gets like an A, B, C, or D, because then I'd be so worried that I go to a place I love and you'd be like, yeah, this is like a D quiet place, and you're like, damn it, I experienced so much quiet here.
Well, it's interesting too. I think it's important to recognize that just because a place doesn't qualify for like a wilderness quiet park award or doesn't meet that criteria, doesn't make it have less value
Yeah.
and doesn't make it less impactful as a visitor to be there and experience the quiet. I had this experience in California in the largest state park in California. It's called Anza Borrego Desert State Park. It is east of San Diego by a bit. Anza Borrego is like amazing. If you ever get the opportunity, it's like so big and so vast, and it's like Joshua Tree with none of the crowds, and it's an incredible park. And the community there essentially approached Quiet Parks International and said, we want to name this a wilderness quiet park. And I went out for 3 years in a row. Like, I'd collect data multiple times a year for 3 years, trying to see if it could meet wilderness quiet parks criteria. And it just couldn't. Like, there was a few different factors where it was, I need to be certain. When I tell someone this is a quiet place, I need to be really certain. So it didn't quite meet wilderness quiet park status. And instead, we developed a program called Quiet Conservation Areas, which is essentially can be any piece of land that people are trying to protect quiet there, and you can have a quiet experience. It might not be 15 minutes or more on average like the wilderness quiet parks. However, they still have value. And I remember having a conversation with the community there of being like, Anza Borrego is really quiet. But according to this scientific criteria that like I cooked up with experts, it's not, but that doesn't really mean anything. Like, not to say my criteria
Yeah, sure.
doesn't have value,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people who would be mad at me if I said that. But it's like, it doesn't really matter if a place is special to you. Like, you could feel quiet on your grandmother's porch. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the important stuff. Is your grandmother's porch going to be a wilderness quiet park? Probably not. But I would say pretty confidently that in the world, there's probably going to be less than 50 quiet parks, wilderness quiet parks. In the States, I don't think there's probably more than 10. And I think 5 would be awesome. So it's really hard to meet that really exacting criteria. It doesn't make it less valuable. My dad says that I like ruined his back porch for him a few years ago. He's like, because now I just hear the highway and stuff. And I'm like, it's still your back porch, enjoy it. It's great.
It's funny you bring up the work that has to be done, because I was thinking when you were talking about coming to Pennsylvania, is it like, oh, I went out and like on a Tuesday, it was just like really quiet. And the fact that you have to keep going out in different seasons or at different moments to be able to attract that really shows that like you didn't get lucky on some day and it was quiet that particular, there weren't a lot of flights over. The fact that you're going out there multiple times and you're being able to kind of put your name on it and say like, yeah, if I'm saying this is quiet and I've done all this work, it's actually quiet.
Yeah, it's important that like we acknowledge too, especially a place like Pennsylvania, like the seasons make such a difference in the soundscape in Pennsylvania. So in May, I could wake up at 4 a.m. and the sun is up and it could be really quiet, in Pennsylvania, in a wild area. If I wake up at 4 a.m. in October and it's hunting season, it's not going to be quiet. There's going to be a lot of people out hunting, which is great. Like that's what that land is there for. So it's important that we visit in every season multiple times. Usually we try and visit on weekends, on weekdays, different times of day. We usually conduct our testing early in the morning for a few reasons. One is because you're more likely to find quiet early in the morning. The other is that sound travels more efficiently in a rarefied atmosphere. So there's less wind happening, the atmosphere is cooler, sound travels further. So our acoustic horizon becomes bigger, we call it. And yeah, wind isn't as much of an issue. Whereas if you went out in the afternoon and the wind is howling through the trees, you're not collecting data that's as informative, that's as valuable as if it's early in the morning. You're not standing next to a river, things like that. You can actually count the number of planes and the distance of planes. And I catalog like, oh, here's a flight directly overhead. This is, Newark to Los Angeles, United Boeing 737. So the amount of data we collect is really hinges on how good our conditions are. There's times we show up to collect data and there's like storms for 3 days straight and we just can't really do much. But we do try and go in lots of different seasons and talk to land managers about what their visitation looks like at different times of year. When is their peak? When is their the bottom of the visitation? And kind of get a whole picture of a place. And there are definitely wilderness quiet parks that are less quiet during certain times of year, and that's okay.
The testing that you have planned for Pennsylvania, was that something that was brought on through like the nominating process on the website, or was DCNR reaching out to you or conservation groups? How did that relationship begin?
I believe a member of the DCNR staff reached out to us just as a civilian because they heard about our work and was interested in if we had looked at Pennsylvania. And then I think that kind of spun into something a bit larger, where we've been able to now start sort of a more formal relationship with the DCNR to help kind of do what I was talking about before, which is like provide some resources as soundscape experts to help them kind of accomplish their goals of surveying different pieces of land.
How do you think Pennsylvanians, with their deep outdoor heritage and love for wild places, can help protect natural quiet?
Yeah, Pennsylvania is really special because one is like Pennsylvania is a super underrated state in terms of its nature. A lot of people don't think about Pennsylvania as having a lot of beautiful nature, and they are incredibly wrong because Pennsylvania is just gorgeous and has all these different ecosystems and climates and things like that. So one is Pennsylvanians are really lucky to live where they live, and most Pennsylvanians know that. I think like being mindful of quiet as a resource is like the first step that anyone takes. Like this is an issue, or not an issue. This is like a topic that a lot of people have never thought about before, and that's okay. And so even just thinking about it next time you're going for a walk, even around your neighborhood, about like, what sound am I hearing right now? Is valuable. And that's the kind of stuff that can lead us to a more well-rounded sort of understanding of how we protect quiet places and how we can become better listeners. There are really obvious things like, hey, like don't put your Bluetooth speaker on when you're going for a hike, or maybe when you're in a natural place, like don't shout, to the person who's like 20 yards in front of you. Just like try and be mindful that other people and animals and birds and insects are experiencing this environment too. But it all starts with listening. And once we start listening, I think a lot of things become clear.
If you had to recommend one or two Pennsylvania destinations where people could experience real tranquility, where would they be?
I'll say this with the asterisk that I haven't done extensive testing in Pennsylvania. But some of the places we're looking at that I think are promising are areas like Hammersley Wild Area, the Allegheny National Forest, and kind of the northern swath, like north of Route 80, is going to be, I think, a bit quieter. There still will be air traffic, but you can kind of look at like a satellite image of the state and see, okay, where are their roads? And then you can, next to it, pull up like a little flight radar and see, okay, because planes don't always travel along the same exact routes, but oftentimes they are routed very similarly. So you can kind of look and try and find like, ooh, this trail might be quieter. But I'm curious, like the places that people go to that they find quiet in. There's certainly little nooks and crannies of lots of Pennsylvania state parks and state forests that you can feel that quiet experience that I'm talking about, even if it wouldn't necessarily qualify as a wilderness quiet park or something.
It's exciting to hear about your partnership or your beginning of the working relationship with DCNR. What are ways that different departments can incorporate soundscape management into their work? How do they have to think about this going forward if they haven't thought about it for many years?
Oftentimes I work with land managers, whether it's state parks or national parks or, anything in between, different reserves. And they know that quiet is important, and they know that soundscape ecology is a thing. But it's hard to see like where the rubber meets the road in that regard. There are really simple things that land managers can do when even doing things like when a new vending machine has to get put into a building or on the outside of a building, as they often are at like campgrounds and stuff. Repairing a rattly vending machine is actually something we did at a park that vastly improved the soundscape there. And no one really no one put a finger on it until I visited it. And I was like, can we just like tighten that bolt on that vending machine, please? So land managers are, again, so many. I would say this pretty universally is that like land managers in this country are stretched very thin in terms of their budget, their time, and their responsibilities. So my hope is to like take some of that load off of them and add resources to the pot. They don't need to be soundscape experts. They have all sorts of other things to worry about. Let me be the soundscape expert. Ask me the questions you need, and I can make recommendations for you based on that. So it's really and then there's a lot of training we do as well. I'll add is that when I go to a place to conduct this testing, the best case scenario is that I get some days with the resource managers or with the park rangers, so that way they can hear what I'm hearing, and I can kind of walk them through it. And immediately, I think that there's kind of like a light bulb that switches, because once you clue into it, it's hard to clue out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think there's a lot of really good opportunities to be able to, I think about those like land managers or those park managers that have been doing this for 30 years and kind of with the roll of the eyes, like, I got to do a new thing now. Now I got to care about sound as much as, but then I also think about the people that have been there for 30 years and go, oh, we should have been doing this the whole time. Like, it must be rewarding that when you're doing these trainings, like you see that kind of snap in place, like, yeah, that makes sense. Why aren't we doing this? And how can we do this going forward? It's got to be pretty rewarding.
I think so. And like what we've found time and time again is that when parks approach us and we bring this idea of quiet to their visitors, they have really positive experiences. So not only are we doing this like for ecological and conservation reasons, but also in places like Anza Borrego, we like developed a quiet map for visitors to use while they're there of
That's
places
awesome.
they're likely to find quiet, which is so cool, So interpreting this resource, quiet and sound, for visitors to these places is a big part of what we want to do as well. And so when you have a land manager who recognizes the importance of quiet and allows us to help them create interpretive materials to help interpret the resource, we just see like visitor satisfaction is really high when they interact with those materials, because it's not totally new for everyone, but it is a new way of appreciating a landscape that maybe you've been to a bunch of times. And I know people who have lived, at a trailhead and hiked on a trail for 30 years, and they tell me they've never actually sat down and just listened, and then once they do, it's like, it's a whole new experience and a whole new lens to kind of appreciate an environment from. And I also think a lot of resource managers and conservationists, conservation for a long time has said like, okay, I run the American Toucan Association and I want to protect toucans. I hope that's not a real organization, because I'm not actually trying to badmouth anyone here.
Yeah.
But if you just care about protecting toucans, you're going to like lose sight of the other things. Like, what insects do toucans rely on for their food source? What trees do those insects rely on for their habitat source? What is the like water table doing to that tree? All these different things. Like, I think we're realizing that conservation cannot be siloed. You can't just care about water quality without caring about air quality, without caring about soil contamination, without caring about noise pollution. And what's really interesting about noise pollution as opposed to other types of pollution is that like noise is a really good indicator, or I should say the soundscape is a really good indicator for the overall health of an environment. So if I take a soundscape measurement, if I take data on a soundscape and I find that there's a lot of invasive species and there's a lot of noise pollution, there's a lot of resource extraction, those ecosystems are generally pretty degraded. If I go to a place and deploy equipment and find a wealth of biodiversity of native species and very little noise pollution, those ecosystems are generally pretty intact. And by saving a place from noise, we're also saving it from all sorts of other types of contamination that can be happening. And vice versa, when you protect a place from soil contamination, it often becomes quieter. All these types of pollution don't exist in a vacuum. We can't just work on one. We need to like look more holistically about how these ecosystems work and how we as humans interact with our land, because it's all tied together.
It's funny too, because if you don't pay attention, like, it always takes something for me to pay attention to. Like, it very rarely will I just like discover upon the idea. And I think about it a lot with light pollution. because I have a buddy who's extremely sensitive to light, and I mean, you could turn a light off in your headlamp off in a forest, and he's walking down every path. He's not hitting a single branch. I am near blind anyway, but I need that light, and every time I go camping with him or I travel with him, I always, because of that, think, man, why is that light shining directly up in the sky? Why does that have to be that bright? Why wouldn't they just cover this and that? And it's one of those things when it comes to noise where you're like, why the hell wouldn't they just, screw that bolt in a little bit better? Or why would there be an ice machine here? And it's when you start to kind of like what your dad said, when you start to hear it, you're like, oh, okay. And now I'm starting to see why there are problems like this. And it's not just, oh, the sound is bad, so everything else is good. A lot of times it's going to be a symptom or at least an indicator for other things.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't believe I haven't even mentioned light pollution this whole time, because light pollution and sound pollution are so closely related.
There,
and we like, feel like a sister organization to Dark Sky International in a lot of ways. And what's more gorgeous than like seeing the Milky Way, And I'd say the same thing, like what's more beautiful than listening to just the sounds of nature without any sort of man-made noise? Those are the experiences that change you fundamentally as a person and change how you interact with your world. So the more we can give people those experiences and get them out into nature, get them under the Milky Way in natural quiet, like, man, we'd all be so much happier if we could do that once a week.
Yeah. I was in my late 20s before I ever saw what a real starry sky looked like. And then when I saw it, I was like, this is what everyone's been talking about. Like, oh, I get this. Like, this is pretty sick. But I was 26, 27.
Yep. Yeah. It's like most adults are not exposed to starry night skies. Most kids will never see the starry night sky unless they go out of their way to do it. These are the things we're like trying to kind of acknowledge and create more access to.
What do you hope the Quiet Parks movement achieves in the next decade?
I'm very proud of what Quiet Parks International has done in the past like 6 years or so, having all volunteer staff and volunteers kind of all over the world who care about this. And I interact with people all the time who don't speak the same language as me, but we both know quiet. And so it works. I hope that we can say that we have quiet parks in every country in the next decade. That'd be really, really cool. It's quite a bit of work, especially for an all volunteer staff of between 5 and 10. And we do have hundreds of volunteers kind of all over the world. But I just love to see this concept of quiet as not so foreign. And I think, not to like pat ourselves on the back, but I think the most important thing that we've done as an organization is actually opened up the conversation about quiet and got people thinking about it. And when I tell people what I do for work and they say, I've never thought about that before, like I had no clue, I'm like, I'm so happy that we're talking, because that's kind of where it all starts. It's just a little perspective change. So yes, it'd be great to have a quiet park in every country, or, have these kind of more organizational milestones. But being able to have appearances like this, where if 150 people listen to this podcast, and of those 150, 50 of them have never thought about sound or noise before, great, we've done a good job, So I hope to kind of continue the work that we've been doing and continue to bring it to places that really need it.
Where can people go to learn more about the work of Quiet Parks International?
Quietparks.org is a good place to start. You can look at our program areas, our awarded parks, our parks that are under evaluation. We have a map that shows kind of all of the different places we have our eyes on, or ears on, I should say. And then if you want to chat, like I'm just a guy who lives in Duluth, Minnesota. I spend a lot of time in quiet, and I love talking with people about quiet. So like you, Christian, just shot me an email and we're like, hey, can we talk about quiet? And I'm loving it. So if anyone wants to talk about quiet, or you have ideas about quiet, or you want to volunteer or anything, shoot me an email, matt@quietparks.org. Would just like love to talk and connect with people who care about quiet or might want to care about quiet.
Matt, thanks so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Christian. I appreciate it.
I want to thank my guest, Matt Mickelson, for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com, or you can click support this show in the podcast description to provide a monthly donation. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexanderson. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.